The Iowa legislative session has ended. Now all the bills that lawmakers passed are headed to the governor's desk. A look at some of their decisions impacting people living in the cities. Iowa lawmakers approved a $9 billion budget. It includes a 2.25% increase in per pupil school spending. Lawmakers also struck civil rights protections for transgender citizens from the state. They focused on eliminating DEI programs in schools, and in a rare fight among Republicans, they passed eminent domain reform to prevent a private carbon capture pipeline company from forcibly acquiring property. Last month, we talked with a top Republican in the legislature about these legislative moves. Now it's the Democrats' turn. We wanted to get a perspective from two of the newest members of the legislature, Democratic State Senator Mike Zimmer from Dewitt and Democratic State Representative Daniel Gosa from Davenport. Well, Senator, Representative, this is your first term, your first days in the state legislature. Senator, let's start with you. I mean, you're in the super minority. There's not much you can do. You don't have much of a voice there, so was it worth running?
Well, I would say contrary. We have a voice. That's what we have. But as far as impacting decision making and pieces of legislation, very little. If we don't speak up and get the right folks at the subcommittee where the public can actually weigh in on a bill right from the very get-go. Once it comes out of that subcommittee and into committee, when you've got a supermajority, they've already counted the votes and they know pretty much where they're heading. And when a piece of legislation gets to the floor for floor debate, at least on the Senate side, it's already going to pass. That's just a given. So that's a time in which we had an opportunity to speak up and at least express maybe a different point of view.
As far as the House is concerned, this was your first session as well.
So it was like drinking from a fire hose. It's a lot to take in, right? It's a lot different from being on the school board. One of the biggest things was kind of learning, I guess being a union guy, it was like going through an apprenticeship all over again, right? I had to earn my stripes. Legislators on the other side of the aisle had to see how I was to work with and things like that. I built a rapport over the years being on the school board with a lot of our local legislators, so that kind of helped out quite a bit. And it was just kind of learning how everything works, the whole process, and who you can work with on certain things. But yeah, the same thing when it came to the floor, the votes were there. You knew it was there, whether it was a good, bad, or indifferent bill. I will say, probably what do you think? 85% of the legislation's bipartisan. It's that 15% that's the really nasty stuff that gets pushed through, and sometimes it goes through like in the 11th hour and things like that. That was a little disheartening when there was so many things that we could have worked on, whether it's property tax relief and things like that really impact our constituents. When you get up there and you kind of see how you're handcuffed on certain things. But again, I've always been a firm believer in being an advocate for your constituents, and that's what we do every day up there when we're there.
Well, one area that Republicans were split was eminent domain, with Senate Republicans really pushing it, demanding a discussion and a vote, or else the budget was going to be held hostage in a way. The governor has vetoed the eminent domain. Were you supportive of it, and did it surprise you, and do you think there's going to be a special session?
So I did vote against it. There are a lot of good jobs associated with the pipeline and things like that. That was a thing for me. I was only one of, I think there was 4 people in the House that voted against it. It was a politically motivated vote, and sometimes you see that up there as another big surprise. They try to get you certain ways on votes because that's how they're going to use against you for the next political cycle and things like that. I was very surprised to see how it got locked up on the Senate side, but it was I'm going to say this, it was very interesting to see, because you see the process on how people are threatened. If you don't vote this way, they're going to pull your bills, they're going to remove you. And then when Senator Lofgren had sent that email out about that, that let everybody know, that kind of pulled the curtain back and you could actually see, because that is a real thing. You do see that. I mean, when you see some votes, you'll see them run down the floor to grab somebody and pull them back and, change your vote and things like that. So that's a very real thing that does happen. So I was glad that kind of got put out there so people understand that.
Yeah, and on the Senate side, personally, I really did reinforce that when we pledge to serve, that we support the Constitution, and the Fifth Amendment is very clear about using eminent domain, not using eminent domain for private gain. And when the Iowa Utility Board defined the carbon sequestration pipeline as a public utility, that really brought into question, so what are the appendages, so to speak, like a gas line that you tap off of and goes to homes? What's being tapped off of the CO2? There is nothing. So that was my first and foremost support. I made it very clear in my floor speech in support of the eminent domain bill that we were not using eminent domain as the vessel to kill the pipeline. Iowa needs ethanol production. They have to have it. Iowa needs those union jobs to build the pipeline. What they don't need is to be using eminent domain to take someone's property that they don't want it coming across. I will say that there were two pieces of legislation that were presented. The House had actually initially passed out of subcommittee a simple 2-paragraph bill that just said you cannot use eminent domain for the pipeline. That was it. We actually took that House bill, and the Democrats offered it as an amendment, and it was voted down by our Republican colleagues to just make it clean. And I also will have to say that the senator that had been on the House side before, that was on the Commerce Committee, that killed the pipeline there and then got voted and moved over to the Senate side of it, he was there also to kill that bill the same way. And that's what he was trying to leverage. And when we affectionately referred to as the 12 apostles, when the 12 Republicans stepped forward and said, we're not going to let this go another year, because this is year 4 that they have been, that the property owners have been showing up to the Capitol every day. And that's what I would say to the audience, that if you don't think your voice matters, if you're persistent and you're there and you show up and you let your representatives know, it can make a difference. It does make a difference.
Well, the eminent domain vote is expected to have some repercussions when it comes to people voting. And the governor's decision to veto it, she's now not running for re-election. What kind of political repercussions do you think there's going to be in regards to the eminent domain vote at the local level as a senator and also as a representative?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see what those political repercussions, and to your point, the governor's not running again, so she was safe to do that. How that's going to impact the Republican caucus, I think that's going to remain to be seen what's going to happen. I do know on the Senate side, to Representative Gosa's point, it has torn the Republican caucus apart. And just to watch the, what would I say, the repercussions that that the Republican leadership did to their own caucus members about removing them from leading a bill, to Representative Gosa's point, State Senator Mark Lofgren penned that letter saying, hey, here's what happened. It's not done. So I'm going to be curious to see what chairmanships are removed and how that gets moved around, and also to see what type of new leadership on the Senate side emerges heading into 2026.
Because to your point, I mean, we also kind of saw some of this strong arming when it came to the school voucher vote among Republicans in the last a few sessions ago. You're in a more urban district, but you still have rural constituency. It really seems to be an urban-rural issue as well as when it comes to eminent domain.
Yeah, I do have a little bit of rural on the western side of my district. I did not personally get a lot of emails from local constituents. Any of the emails I received were from like the Des Moines area and things like that. And to Senator Zimmer's point, I do think there are going to be a lot of repercussions. It's going to be very interesting and wanting to reconvene the special session and things like that. Folks are doing some of this stuff now. They're politically motivated, right? You got people jockeying to run for governor and different things like that. And that was a learning curve up there, seeing who's trying to get to where, whatever, instead of at the end of the day doing the right thing for your constituents that elect us to do these jobs, and to call us up and chew us out if we do the wrong thing, or send us emails and different things like that to educate us. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things go the next session, because it's an election year, obviously, for everybody in the House and half of the Senate or something like that. So it'll be very interesting to see how things shake out.
You also approved, the legislature approved, a $9.43 billion budget, a $478 million increase from the last one, 5.3%, but still expecting a $900 million deficit. When we talked to Representative Moore in regards to this, a Republican who's in the Appropriations Committee chair, he was pointing out that, yeah, there is a deficit, but we have this large fund that we need to draw down. What did you like about the budget, and what did you not like about this budget that passed? And once again, Democrats do not have much of a role when it comes to budgeting for the state of Iowa.
So one of the big things for me, obviously, was public education funding. I thought that should have been more. All the time you hear the governor talk about how they had to do the vouchers because the public education wasn't meeting the students' needs and things like that. Well, if you continually underfund those things, you're not able to have reading interventionists, math interventionists, things that are going to directly affect those kiddos. And to some of the other stuff, running in a deficit. I can remember being on the Davenport school board, and we got in a lot of trouble for running in a deficit. I mean, we were under a partial accreditation at the time I became the board president. So it's very interesting to me how people sometimes, I'm going to say, speak out of both sides of their mouth. It's, hey, you shouldn't do this, but then when we do it, it's okay to do that. We should use those rainy day funds and things like that now, and it's all going to even out later on. But if someone else does that, heaven forbid, they're going to go after you for it, and they're going to say, you weren't using funds wisely and things like that. So it was very interesting to see those different perspectives up there.
And we should point out that you both are former school board presidents at Davenport and Central Dewitt. I'm assuming that education funding was one of the areas that you thought that Iowa fell behind on.
Oh, absolutely. What you're seeing is a decade of one-party rule, and the result of that is underfunding not only education but also the judicial branch, and using that underfunding to build up this $7 billion rainy day fund to provide this economic experiment where now once we get into year 8 or 9 of this underfunding, we're using those dollars. Now we're going to implement the income tax cap at 3.8%. We went through and cut corporate tax from 8.5% down to the 5%. And so now all of a sudden, what the only tax bucket left is sales tax as far as from the state revenue. And I knew that was coming. I knew it was coming, and that's when there was a Senate joint resolution to remove the, what would I call the fund that was approved 10 years ago, where the first 3/8 of a cent on the next property tax increase will go to improving parks and conservation and that kind of stuff. And they tried to make a play at it about removing that, and it didn't make it. But that was my first indication that now what we're going to be talking about is increasing sales tax. Republicans don't want to talk about that. But as you start looking down the barrel of a $917 million deficit, I don't care how much money you have in reserves, there are two economic principles that you do not violate. One is you don't spend more money than you have bringing in, and two, you don't use one-time funding to backfill. You just do not do those two things. Those are conservative fiscal bedrocks that I feel like I'm in Alice in Wonderland, where up is down and down is up and left is right and right is left, where what's going on. It's like, what are you doing? Well, they'll find out. And the other piece that Representative Moore, and I respect Representative Moore a lot. I've worked with him when his kids went through Pleasant Valley High School, and I was administrator there. But the piece that they're not taking into account is that every single one of those appropriations bills always had the state side and it had the federal grant side. Oh, we're going to get these federal dollars that we're going to do continuing child care, that we're going to do Head Start, that we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff. Well, then I would be looking at the DOJ report coming out saying, this is going to be cut, this is going to be cut, this is going to be cut. So if there's going to be a special session called, I'm waiting until this year's federal fiscal dollars, which usually goes from October 1st to September 30th. I'm going to be watching real closely the month of October and November, where all of a sudden now we actually see what federal dollars are or are not coming, and then all of a sudden we're going to be looking at, well, how are we going to backfill, because the budget was based upon those two pots of money, state funding and federal funding. You remove the federal fund, now what are you going to do?
Well, and especially also when you look at the possibility of FEMA being defunded, and if there is a natural disaster of any sort in the state of Iowa, that the state may have to, at least after the hurricane season, we're told, would have to perhaps find the money. Is that worrisome to you? We'll start with you, Representative Gosa. Is that worrisome to you that we're seeing federal cutbacks? We're not quite sure how that's going to impact a state such as Iowa?
Very concerning. So I actually served on the appropriations subcommittee of the federal and other funds, where they're talking about money would come in and block grants from the federal government. You know, one of the big ones was like from the Department of Education, if they wind up getting rid of that and different things. And right now with the state of affairs at the federal level, I mean, we don't know and we can't count on anything right now because there's so much uncertainty and unknown out there on what programs are getting cut and different things like that. So it's going to be very hard. And same as Senator Zimmer said, it's going to be very interesting to see how things shake out when we go back into this next session. So.
Let's talk about something that went through the legislature very quickly, and that the removal of civil rights protections for transgender citizens. Were you surprised at the speed that was done, and what do you think it says now about the state of Iowa?
That was probably one of the most upsetting pieces of legislation to come through in approximately 72 hours, especially when you understand the process that you need to go through on both chambers, starting with the subcommittee, committee, and then working through and have reconciliation between two bills. This was all planned out right from the get-go, and the governor, for her to sign that so fast, I mean, I swear they must have, the clerk must have ran it over to her, down to her office to have it signed. Here was taking a sledgehammer to a civil rights that has been in Iowa's Constitution. And when you look at Iowa's history, most people don't understand that before Iowa was even a state, it was a territory. It was on the leading edge of recognizing women's right to own property, to recognize that Iowa had the first woman lawyer pass the bar exam and receive a law license. We were the first to have black officers in the Civil War out at Camp Dodge. And when our history is just littered with being way ahead of the rest of the country and recognizing civil rights for a whole array of groups. Here we're talking about dealing with the bathroom issue, which can be resolved with unisex bathrooms, and then resolving transgender male athletes playing in female sports. We could address those two issues. We did not have to remove the civil rights for work and for housing from the Constitution, from Iowa's Constitution, to do this. It was just horrendous, and especially for me to sit in a seat in the Senate and know the history and know the people that sat in that seat before me that did the right thing, and for that to happen was just an absolute travesty.
There is a lot of discussion about Iowa losing young people. Do you think that this just adds to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every day at the Capitol that discussion was going on, or subcommittees or whatever, the Capitol was packed. I've never seen that many people. I'm talking wall to wall. They had to bring in, I think there was over 250 law enforcement officers there just to make sure if there's anything going on. They were there to walk legislators to their vehicles if they felt unsafe. In my personal opinion, if you felt you needed to be walked to your vehicle, then you took the wrong vote on that issue. And I know their hammering point that they kept going on about was men and women's restrooms. And again, that could have been addressed with unisex bathrooms and things like that. And what I did talk to a few of the legislators about, you know, they're so hardcore about men being in women's sports, but I had asked him, where were you at when we were trying to get girls state wrestling sanctioned in the state of Iowa? You were okay with them getting thrown around on mats, having to wrestle with guys. But then all of a sudden this is a huge thing, and they were making it over restrooms and things like that. With so much hate going on in the country as a whole, this just threw gasoline on the fire. And it's not something that, you know, we should be raising our kids on and things like that. I mean, you're going to love who you're going to love. You know, that's everybody's right. We're all, you know, citizens of this country, and that's, you know, one of your rights. And to make it such a polarizing issue like that, I mean, and to see all the hateful things and things like that, it just blew my mind away. And again, how fast it went through, because there is a process of going through both chambers. I mean, I think you have almost 12 different opportunities that a bill could get killed, and something to get rammed through like that, but yet we couldn't talk about property taxes, school funding, other things like that. Oh, we got to take time, we got to do all this, but this stuff that people really want, we'll get through no problem. But then, hey, reelect us again, because we need to have more time to go through these things. So you can tell what the priorities are and different things like that. And a lot of it is, it's just upsetting people, making them mad, so then they go out and vote. I mean, I'm going to say this, I compare it to wrestling, right? Whoever's the maddest, you go hard for your heel, then you go hard for the hero. And I mean, that's what this stuff is. I mean, we'll all might get in fights and stuff on the floor, but then we might be out having a beer together afterwards and things like that. We might not be very far off on our views, but it's certain sticking points or pressure points that get people to do that. Again, being removed from committees, different things like that. You might be primaried. I mean, we saw that if you didn't go the governor's way. I mean, she was even getting involved in school board races. So, I mean, that's very real, going after people like that. It's sad that it has to be like that, and we have to make everything so political and polarizing that it really does a disservice, again, to the folks that elect us to these offices.
We have just 1 minute left. I just want to get Representative Gosa, what was your impression of this, your very first session?
It was very extreme on some aspects. It was a lot of learning, a lot of things to take in. I think I learned a lot on the process and different stuff. And you could definitely tell the issues that the special interests wanted, they went through, and other things that your common constituent needed, you know, to address their concerns, they were kind of put on the back burner.
Senator Zimmer, same, just a few moments left.
Yeah, I would say I was really surprised at how tight the Senate Republican caucus held together, and that I was yearning during a floor debate to hear other side. I really listen to people when they're talking on the floor, because I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I hadn't thought about that. But when only the floor manager was allowed to speak and no other Republican senator was allowed to talk about anything related to that bill, that was really disappointing. And then after the fact, to talk to some of the folks that I was trying to build relationships with, to say, yeah, I wouldn't have voted for that, but I was told we vote as a block. And on top of it, they would not accept or vote for one Democratic amendment at all, period. Every single one of them, even if it was a very good thing for Iowans, didn't matter. If it didn't come from them, it was not accepted.
Our thanks to Iowa State Senator Mike Zimmer from Dewitt and Iowa State Representative Daniel Gosa from Davenport. Still to come, a civic spark that ignited one man's career in helping children thrive in the cities. But first, a look at area events, thanks to Visit Quad Cities.
Check out the things to do this week in the Quad Cities. Start off with the Quad Cities River Bandits game at Modern Woodman Park on June 18th. Then join the Juneteenth celebration at the Figge Art Museum on June 19th. Next, head to Play Crafters Bar and Theater to watch Miss Nelson is Missing on June 20th. After that, the Rock Island County Historical Society will be hosting an open house on June 21st. And finally, attend the Great Race Watch Party at the Skinner Block Courtyard on June 22nd. For more events like these, check out our events calendar at visitquadcities.com.
Next year marks 250 years since America declared its independence in 1776. Now, throughout the coming year and leading up to the 4th of July next year, we're asking people about their civic spark, why they chose their career, and how it impacts our society. Daniel Sheridan now leads the United Way of the Quad Cities Community Impact Programs. Before that, he was the longtime leader of the Davenport Youth Theater. His work has impacted thousands of young people's lives, and we asked Daniel Sheridan, what is your civic spark?
Well, for me, storytelling has always been a really important part of my life. And the opportunity to share a story and an idea and understand other people. And my work at junior theater for 16 years allowed me to build voices of kids so that they could participate in the democratic process. They could participate by thinking about others and speaking with clarity and confidence. And then the work at the United Way of the Quad Cities is about convening and lifting voices to make sure that, a democracy doesn't just happen at a federal, national level. It happens on a hyper-local level. And we have to engage every citizen and respect them and understand them and give them a seat at the table. And I think that those conversations, those stories, are what make America, America, and helps build the fabric of a great country.
Our thanks to Daniel Sheridan, Senior Vice President of Community Impact with the United Way of the Quad Cities. On the air, on the radio, on the web, on your mobile device, and streaming on your computer, thanks for taking some time to join us as we talk about the issues on the cities.